So let's talk about your research, where you've studied threats against public officials across sectors like healthcare, education, law enforcement. What warning signs should organizational leaders be watching for when employees may be radicalizing or even posing an insider threat?
That's a great question. And, one of the tricky things about radicalization is that most indicators of radicalization are perfectly legal.
True.
So, there's a real constitutional issue when it comes to how we make these assessments and what we're
Mhm.
monitoring. And of course, if you only monitor things that are against the law, well, then you already have your issues that you can act on. So if you're waiting for people to break the law, then it's kind of, late in the game to be then.
That's right.
But on the other hand, we have to be careful not to violate people's constitutional protections and punish people for, having beliefs that might not be popular or so
Right.
forth. And certainly, one of the tricky things about threats to public officials is there's some very kind of ambiguous lines, and this kind of built into the statute. I mean, if you say I'm going to put a bullet in such and such congressperson's head, well, you've pretty clearly violated
Mhm.
the law, and can be potentially arrested and charged. But if it's a little more ambiguous what you're saying, then you may not have crossed the legal threshold for having made a criminal threat. You might have made a threat, but it might not be a criminal threat. And I think that's kind of an interesting distinction, is that there are threats and then there are criminal threats. And depending on how specific and whether there's time and place in terms of what you've communicated, that all makes a difference, and whether there's any indications that you plan to carry out the act is also part of it. And that gets to that radicalization part. Unfortunately, we live in a country right now where a lot of people are saying things they shouldn't say.
Mhm.
And there's almost an encouragement to be kind of a troll of sorts, and to, engage in this kind of toxic banter. Social media in many respects, I think, promotes this kind of toxic communication. And so this is kind of built into our climate right now. And it makes assessing these issues that much more complicated. What are the false positives? What are the false negatives?
Yeah.
And, it's very difficult to suss those things out. But it's the more subtle stuff where it's like, do you take action or not? And I don't think there are any easy answers there.
And again, going back to my comment from earlier, it's really kind of that totality of all that information that all of a sudden begins to put off the warning signs. Not necessarily, red lights and sirens at that point,